Hey there, gunfighters, aspiring gunfighters, people that just like guns. Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns and gunfighting the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. A podcast to hopefully make godly men strong and strong men godly. I'd like to forego the bio. This is likely not the first time you've listened. If it is, maybe listen to another episode to get some bona fides. But today I wanted to talk about what I think is a pretty cool topic, a gunfighter library. Yes, a gunfighter library. Who says gunfighters can't be nerds? If you think that, you may have never talked to a ballistics nerd. I consider myself one. Anybody that sits there and studies ballistics charts, right? But what should one look for? What are some of my favorite books in a gun fighting library? Well, number one should be no surprise. The backbone of any library, of anybody's resources, should be the Bible. Yes, the Bible for gunfighters. You shouldn't just fight for the sake of fighting. You should fight for the right reasons at the right time. To know when it's right to fight, you need a good grounding in truth. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Also, there's a lot of really good tactics in the Bible. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. Let he who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one. From the mouth of Jesus, the Gospel of Luke. There's a lot of good wisdom in general, but also warrior wisdom in the Bible. The Lord is a man of war, the Bible says. Exodus 15, the Lord is a man of war. There can be no better warrior, right? Because God is perfect. So the Bible should be the backbone. Here is one that I think everybody should read, especially if it comes to really being or aspiring to be a master at pistol craft. Beyond the Fundamentals with Brian Enos. Now, Brian Enos was one of the, pioneers of modern practical pistol shooting. But his book deals a lot, especially the first couple of chapters, with mindset, with some really crucial things I think are really lacking in a lot of other training, and that is things like focus and awareness and feedback. These are crucial if you want to be a great handgun shooter. Brian Enos, Beyond the Fundamentals. I suppose I should include a book from Jeff Cooper, the only one I'm really familiar with. How to Ride, Shoot Straight, and Speak the Truth by Jeff Cooper. Another one, John Mosby and Guerrilla Gunfighter. I have volume 2 about the rifle, preparedness rifle and carbines. I would like to get volume 1, but I am on my, I've read it before, I'm on reading it again. It's really good. The language is foul, which I'm not a big fan of. Not that I can't stand foul language. I mean, I was a Marine. But I think you should be able to articulate it without the foul language, which may turn some of you off, so it's a fair warning. But it's got a lot of really good wisdom in there. And I can tell by reading it, it's somebody that's actually been there and done that. Or he's a really good faker. But he's probably been there and done that. Just from what I've seen and know, just by reading his stuff, I'm like, yeah, that's it just rings true for me. So that's John Mosby's Guerrilla Gunfighter, Preparedness Rifle and Carbine. I picked that up because I already had several books on handguns, and I really wanted to get back into the practical, modern fighting rifle and carbine. And so I picked that up, and I was not disappointed. That's John Mosby's Preparedness Rifle and Carbine. It's a really, really good resource. In fact, reading that again got me thinking, I think about this episode. So it's a good book. Not cheap, but worth it. Now, I don't actually have this book, but I was actually a Marine Corps infantryman, specialized infantry, an MOS that doesn't exist anymore, assaultman. So I probably should have a backup hard copy of this, but if you were not Marine Corps or Army infantry, you should probably have one of their field manuals for the kind of things you might be doing. Marine Rifle Squad, MCWP 3-11.2. You also may look at the Army's version of that. And there's a whole library there, which I believe is open source that you can get. But you, depending on what kind of flavor of gunfighter you want to be, if you want to look up the survival manuals like the U.S. Army or Air Force or whatever survival manual, you want to look up the sniper manual like the U.S. Marine Corps Scout Sniper stuff, whatever kind of gunfighter you want to be. You might look up an applicable manual, at least for basic stuff when it comes to tactics, right? A lot of times we think of gunfighting as an individual thing, but hopefully if you ever get in a gunfight, you'll have backup. You should know how to work with other people, how to work in a fire team, how to work in a squad, hand and arm signals, things as rudimentary as that. You know, this is not a substitute for good practice, but the manuals help. So any of those applicable Army, Marine Corps, infantry type manuals. There is, on the rudimentary level, you might want to start with the Soldier's Little Blue Book. It's a good resource, right? Especially if you weren't in the infantry, if you weren't in the Army or the Marine Corps. I served in both. But the Soldier's Little Blue Book, right? If you want to start somewhere, start with that. And then if you want to progress, again, the infantry manuals. Then you may look at the Special Forces Handbook, and then also Guerrilla Warfare. Right, these are resources that you might want to consider having. I've also recently been, I believe, finished all the books in the Patriot series. Now, Patriots, if you were into survival, prepper, gun stuff, it's kind of like the core. I would consider it, next to and after the Bible, the best preparedness novel, fiction novel ever written. And why I think it's so good is it is really entertaining, and it's part novel and part survivalist manual. But reading manuals can get pretty dry, even for the nerdiest of us gun nerds. This does it in a way that makes it a story that's compelling, but is also a manual. Like, for instance, when they talk about doing a blood transfusion, they don't just say, oh, so-and-so got a blood transfusion. They walk you through how to set up a person-to-person IV and what blood types mix with what other blood types. Things like that. It's a survival manual that is entertaining as a survival prepper novel. Fiction. That's the book Patriots by Rawls, James Wesley, I believe, James Wesley Rawls. Patriots. Probably the best prepper novel ever, period, in my opinion. And there's a whole series. My other favorite one in the series is Liberators. And this has to do with a French/Chinese NATO occupation of Canada. And you think that sounds far-fetched. But then you think we just had Hamas paragliding into rave concerts on paragliders and kidnapping and doing all kinds of atrocities to women and children. So maybe it's not that far-fetched. I mean, I wouldn't have thought that would happen a month ago, but here we are. Anyway, it's if the first one is part survival manual, prepper manual, and fiction prepper novel, this one is part prepper novel / guerrilla warfare manual. So if you don't think you're going to actually read like a guerrilla warfare manual, if you're not familiar with it, if you've never done any kind of unconventional warfare, but you want to actually have something entertaining that you'll actually enjoy reading, you may look at Patriots, Liberators. I believe it's the last one in the series. You can read all of them if you want, but Patriots is the first one, and then Liberators deals with guerrilla warfare. And again, it's part novel and part guerrilla warfare manual. And I really like those, both for entertainment and for the knowledge that they convey. And even more important to me, it's written by a Christian. He puts Christianity, he puts Christ and God in the novels. Like, it's important. You can tell his faith is an important part of those novels and that story. And it really comes through, and I appreciate that. And again, that's the James Wesley Rawls Patriot series. I do believe I have read them all, and I wouldn't not recommend any of them. But again, Patriots, the first one, really, really good. And Liberators, if you want the guerrilla warfare, pretty good. Also, again, with my background, I've had TCCC, Tactical Combat Casualty Care. If you have never gotten training, you should get training. None of this is a substitute for hands-on training. You should get some kind of medical training. But the TCCC handbook, it's kind of the de facto standard for combat injury. For the March algorithm, massive bleeding, airway, circulation. That's not how you spell March. It's been a couple of years. Maybe I should go back and review it myself. Massive hemorrhage, airway, respiration, circulation, hypothermia. Again, none of this is going to make you a great shooter. None of this is going to make you a great combat medic, but it will give you some of the knowledge that you can put in place in practice and training to get you there. The TCCC manual, Tactical Combat Casualty Care. Again, it's kind of the de facto standard. Combat medicine has come a long way from when we first started fighting the GWAT back in the early aughts to the 20 years or so spent fighting radical Islamic terrorists that want to kill Christians and cut their heads off. Combat medicine has come a long way, and sadly, we paid for it with a lot of American life and a lot of Iraqi civilian lives and other civilian lives. And that's a sad thing. But let it not be in vain, at least if we can glean some good, practical, life-saving knowledge from that. Like when we first started GWAT, we didn't even carry tourniquets, right? We didn't carry tourniquets. We were kind of told to stay. Our tourniquets were kind of frowned upon. Now, hopefully, every Marine and Army infantryman carries a tourniquet. When I was a cop, even after that, even after I did my tours in Iraq, we still didn't carry tourniquets. Again, emergency medicine's come a long way. You're probably more likely to need that if the world stays relatively the same as it is today for the foreseeable future than a slicked up AR. I guess I said you should have both. But that TCCC, you should get acquainted with it. And I know that this is a gunfighter list, but I absolutely do think that like emergency combat medicine should be part of a gunfighter's repertoire. Here is another one. Dry fire training cards. Technically not a book, but a really good resource. Dry fire training cards. And I believe it's dryfiretrainingcards.com. I don't know personally or don't know much about the guy that made these cards, but as somebody that hopefully by God's grace, except for Sabbath, dry fires pretty much every day, dry fire can get a bit dry. It can get a bit repetitive. And even for the most ardent of gunfighters and the most diligent in training, it can get a bit monotonous and mundane. There's some things in these dry fire cards that I just wouldn't think of without the dry fire cards. Like keeping a proper sight picture and squatting down while engaging targets and rising back up. Just something like that I just wouldn't think of. The dry fire training cards are a really, really good resource. If you consider yourself a gunfighter and you don't dry fire, I would question that. Dry fire absolutely is crucial to being really, really good at shooting. Did it in the Marine Corps, did it LAPD, certainly do it as a competition shooter. If you want to be good, you need to dry fire. Obviously you need a gun, you need to know that it works, you need it zeroed, but after that, dry fire, in my opinion, is more effective than live fire for the majority of skills. If I had to go into a gunfight, I would take the guy that dry fired for 15 minutes every day and went to the range a couple of times a year over the guy that went to the range once a month and didn't do any dry fire. Shooting is a perishable skill. I think it's more effective to do more frequent and short and concise dry fire sessions. Those dry fire training cards, you don't need those. You should dry fire whether or not you have those, but they're a good resource, especially, and I don't use them every day, but when stuff gets really monotonous and I'm trying to figure out what have I not practiced in a while. Like holding the gun in my offhand, my left hand, and doing reloads with the gun in my left hand. That's something I don't practice all the time as much as I probably should, right? Dry fire training cards. They help with stuff like that. It's a good resource. Here's one that's a little bit specific. Call me old school, but I still often will carry a snub-nosed revolver. Protecting Yourself with a Snub-Nosed Revolver by Grant Cunningham. It is a good book, a good resource if you carry a snubby. Also, I'm going to throw in there any reloading manual, period. I don't care if you reload or not. I don't care if you never plan on reloading. If you consider yourself a gunfighter, you should have a reloading manual. This, I think, will greatly help you understand calibers and ballistics and energy and things like that if you want to take your gunfighting to the next level, not just, ooh, I have a Glock 19 in a holster and I took it to range once last year, or I got this Daniel Defense AR because my buddy told me it was the best and I loaded it up with whatever ammo they had at the local gun store. Like, if you want to be a student of the gun, if you want to be a connoisseur of ballistics, any reloading manual is good for this, to understand what is the real difference between a 308 and a 30-06. Well, if you have a reloading manual, you can look and see, oh, with 150 grain loads, not a whole lot, but when you get up to 180, 200 grain, 220 grain loads, it's a different ball game, right? It's apples and oranges at that point. So that's a big difference between a 308 and the 30-06. Does this apply to me? Do I plan on shooting anything higher than 150s? Like, these are things that you can answer more wisely, I believe, for yourself if you actually sit down and look at the numbers versus, oh, somebody on YouTube said this is a great cartridge. Somebody on YouTube said the 224 Valkyrie is going to be the next game changer, and you look at it and realize you look at that compared to a 22-250 or a 220 Swift, which is even older, and you're like, I don't get it. And pretty much a lot of people didn't get it because the cartridges are already kind of dying, I think, and it's only a year or two old, or maybe a few years old. You get the idea. A reloading manual, even if you don't plan on reloading. Another good one, Cartridges of the World. That was a gift given to me that I can't believe I didn't have one before that, but one of the patrons gave me that, and it's really good. Cartridges of the World. I don't care really what edition, unless you want to know mostly about the latest and greatest cartridges. Then, of course, get the newer version of the manuals. Those, I've also, throughout my life, enjoyed the Shooter's Bibles. There's some good articles in there, depending on... They also have articles in there, but they'll generally have a lot of different data, much like a reloading manual in the Shooter's Bibles. So you may also have one or two of those. They are a really good resource, especially if you find them used somewhere, or like that year on sale at Barnes & Noble because they're coming out with the next edition or something like that. These Shooter's Bibles, those can be really good. Another one, and this is kind of cheating because it's not necessarily printed, but I just wanted to make you aware of it. Federal or Hornady, there's probably other manufacturers, but the ballistics calculators. If you want to understand ballistics and you want to... It's so easy now, like, as opposed to when I was younger and I literally would be a nerd and try to memorize ballistics tables. Or you'd have to print it out and have a little card, which you still might want to do, especially for like a grid down scenario. Like last night, like a nerd, I wrote down different dope for the new scout rifle and put it on a piece of Write in the Rain paper and keep it with the rifle, just in case. I need to know my dope at 400 yards with 168 grain federal bonded, right? Something like that. But I got that data before I wrote it down off the federal ballistics calculator. What's a federal load? But I like federal. I use it. It's pretty easy. But Hornady, I think, has one. Likely many other manufacturers have a good ballistics calculator. If you're talking about super long range stuff, there's a lot more that goes into that. But those ballistics calculators. And then here is a big one. One that you probably got and didn't read. Maybe. Hopefully not. The manual that came with your gun. Right? I don't care if it's just another polymer striker fired handgun. If you got a gun and spent all the money on the gun, it probably behooves you to open the manual that came with it and read it. Right? It's free. It's a free resource. When I got my new scout rifle that I'm blessed to have, it has a section on there on maintenance of stainless steel rifles. Now, I'm a big fan of stainless. I like stainless. If you are a fan of the show, you probably know that. But it gave a pretty good tip in the Ruger Scout Rifle Manual for taking care of stainless steel guns. How about this? Minor discoloration can usually be removed by rubbing the stainless area with an abrasive ink eraser. What? That's awesome, right? That's an awesome tip. Talking to somebody that has a pretty, storied background in firearms. That's a great tip. Got it for free because I bought the gun and the manual came with it. So it has stuff in there on adjusting the iron sights that came with the gun, adjusting the length of pull, all that stuff. Although if you're familiar with guns, getting a new gun is not like getting a piece of IKEA furniture. You probably should still read the manual. Read the manual for the gun. Anyway, that I think is pretty much going to wrap it up. There's many books that are not on this list. I threw this out on the Insider Chat, which if you don't know, you can be a part of if you become a patron and then let me know you want to be part of the Insider Chat. And this is from Pat. The Martial Application of the Pistol by Paul Markle. I haven't read that book, so I'm not going to recommend it, but he recommends it, and he is kind of our tribe librarian. I gave him that title, but he is pretty much the group librarian, and he's a good one. He's got a lot of resources when it comes to printed books. With that, we'll roll into the tactical tip of the day and the tactical verse of the day. Talking about gunfighter resources and gunfighter training, I was recently listening to, I think it was the FBI Files, and they're talking about the Miami-Dade shootout, which is kind of one of the quintessential gunfights, if you study gunfighting, that kind of changed the trajectory of American law enforcement gunfighting tactics and equipment. It really did, I think, had a big ripple effect in the law enforcement gunfighting world. Well, in listening to that, it brought to mind something that I think I had forgotten about that case, and that is the fact that those men would go around to people who were shooting, like at shooting areas, and kill them and take their vehicle and take their guns, because they knew there was going to be guns there because there's people shooting. And I've tried to make it a point when I'm out shooting to keep a loaded gun on me, right? How sad would it be to be out at the shooting range, zeroing your gun, and then your gun is empty and you walk down to the target, and now somebody drives by and you get caught with your pants down 50 yards away at your target with no loaded gun because you left your gun on the bench. Even if you're shooting another gun, maybe have just a loaded gun on you so you're not defenseless, right? Talked about that snub nose. Even if you're out there running and gunning, doing tactical drills with your war belt and your Smith & Wesson M&P, maybe have that Smith & Wesson J-frame in a pocket loaded. So even if you're out, you're not completely out of the fight because you have a loaded gun on you, even in training. Obviously, if you're training in a group, just have one guy standing by. But that's a real thing. That's not like a hypothetical thing. That's something that really happened. Like they would go around to shooting areas and kill people and take their guns and vehicles because they knew there was guns there. So sadly, I think that's the tactical tip of the day. Don't let that be you. Don't get caught with your pants down at the shooting range of all places, right? The place you're going to be more prepared and more proficient and more well-armed and well-regulated, and that's the place you get capped. That's not cool. That's your tactical tip of the day. Be armed even at the shooting range. And kind of a bonus tip to that, I don't even know where it comes from, but I've heard it in many different circles, is that every fight that you have is a gunfight because you're bringing the gun. You can hear this when I was a private contractor, when I was in law enforcement. If you're going to deal with somebody, it's a gunfight because you have a gun, which means they could potentially have a gun. Keep that in mind too. Your tactical verse of the day. Hopefully what you care about more than the other books, more than a tactical tip. This is a good one for gunfighters, talking about the Bible being your core for warrior library. No man shall be able to stand against you. The Lord your God will put the dread of you and the fear of you upon all the land where you tread, just as he said to you. With that, men, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.